Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Inhofe, and congratulations to the nominees for your nominations. You're all highly qualified for these positions. A couple of items, Ms. Dalton first. Congrats on being a UVA grad. There have been reports in the last day or so about more instances of Havana syndrome regarding American diplomats who are currently in Geneva and Paris. The syndrome was first reported in Havana. It's been reported as affecting diplomats and other U.S. governmental personnel around the globe and in the DMV in Virginia. The Secretary of State has spoken about this. Other law enforcement agencies are involved, but I also know that the DOD is involved in trying to determine causes and solutions and consequences. I think I would summarize the feelings of the committee members on both the Armed Services Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee. I said on both not being happy with the degree of information we've received about this or progress we've made on it in the couple of years that we've been talking about it. And I would hope that should you be confirmed with the responsibility over both Homeland Defense and hemispheric affairs, that you would be diligent in working with the interagency process to determine what's going on and provide options, certainly within your line of command, but including to Congress about what appropriate responses should be. Do I have your commitment on that?
Senator, yes, you do.
Thank you for that. Dr. Plumb, I want to ask you a question about just growing pains with the Space Force and how we can manage those growing pains effectively. In 2016, this committee did a significant overhaul of much of the department's acquisition policies, and we structured new entities. There had been an Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology and Logistics, ATL, but we instead created new undersecretaries for Research and Engineering and then Acquisition and Sustainment. And that split of the responsibilities has led to some challenges, some lessons learned, some growing pains. I think the Pentagon and others have tried to work through those. But when you're making a structural change of that kind, growing pains are not unusual. The speed with which the department established Space Force could likely lead to similar challenges should you be confirmed. How will you try to ensure that this important new component of our defense, especially as we see peers engaging in activity that is threatening, like the Russian anti-satellite test, how can you work to try to minimize growing pains and maximize the quick effectiveness of this new component of our military?
Thank you, Senator, for that question, and I'll just commend the committee on its creation of Space Force. I think the time is appropriate for a separate service for space. Really, in the past several years, the importance and value of space has increased substantially, and the threat to our assets in space has also increased exponentially. I think this issue of growing pains, you can never get rid of them, Senator, but I think helping ensure from a civilian oversight piece that the laser focuses are on both speed of acquisition and making sure that we can counter threats as they emerge and get past this problem of just, this is a non-trivial thing to say, the speed of the Pentagon and the speed of Pentagon processes does not match the speed of the threat right now. And we need to work to fix that, and that's a hard problem. As far as war fighting, it's a new domain, and there's going to be growing pains there. It has some similarities to cyber operations as well. It's new, it needs to mature, and my goal is to help usher that along.
Thank you, Dr. Plumb. And then Dr. Wallander, Senator Hirono asked you a question about AUKUS, and I share her enthusiasm for closer cooperation between the U.S., Australia, and the U.K. in the Indo-Pacific. Great allies, and I think there's great things we can do together. But I will say, I was very disappointed in the rollout of AUKUS and the bizarre exclusion and really almost humiliation of the French, who are a great security partner in the United States and who are also a significant Indo-Pacific nation with a lot of equities in the Indo-Pacific. And you're not yet confirmed and not yet sort of in the family on this, but I will say I have made efforts to get to the bottom of why AUKUS was done in such a way that alienated an ally, and why couldn't it have been conceived in such a way that would have included an ally and thereby made it more effective? And I've yet to get a good answer from the administration about the breakdown that led to, in my view, taking a great achievement and sort of souring it right out of the gate. So I hope, should you be confirmed, you will, be mindful of the challenges that it created and look for opportunities to work together, not just with Australia and the UK, but to include France and efforts in the Indo-Pacific, because I think they have a lot of equity there and a lot of value to add.
Senator, I share your concern, and you have my commitment that if confirmed, I will focus on all of our important allied relationships, especially that of France, because I agree with you about the value of that extraordinary alliance.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the nominees for being here. Congratulations on your nominations. Dr. Wallander, I enjoyed our conversation yesterday. Thanks for your time. Let me start with you, and let me start with the situation in Ukraine. You said when we spoke yesterday that you could imagine advocating sending more United States forces to Europe to reinforce NATO's eastern flank. I think you've said the same today in the hearing. My question is, wouldn't this perpetuate a sense among Europeans that they don't have to invest in their own militaries but can rely on us in a time of exigency, as this may well soon be, in order to bail them out, for lack of a better word, in their security commitments?
Senator, thank you for that question. With all of our focus on what the United States would do, sometimes we don't elevate enough what we expect and need our allies to do. And as part of a package of looking at American force posture and possible reinforcements to Europe, it would absolutely have to come totally integrated with European NATO member contributions in order to ensure we have the proper defense and deterrence capabilities.
You can tell, I'm sure, from what we talked about yesterday and from my question this morning, that I'm skeptical of sending additional United States troops to Europe for these reasons. But I appreciate your answer. Let me ask you about NATO a little bit more broadly. Given the challenges that we're facing globally, and most notably China's efforts to dominate Asia, do you think that this is the time when it's prudent or advisable for the U.S. to allow Ukraine to join NATO?
Senator, I share your larger concern about the Chinese challenge and agree with you that we can't lose focus on that. And any nested decisions we have to make about European security has to be mindful to that. I fully support NATO's open door policy. NATO is stronger if it is the alliance of strong democratic countries with the capabilities and the democratic governance that is the hallmark of NATO. And if confirmed, I would support NATO's future membership, Ukraine's future membership in NATO if it meets the conditions, and I would look forward to working with Ukrainian partners in order to make sure they meet those standards.
Let me ask you about the NATO allies and their spending commitments. We talked about this yesterday on the phone. U.S. Ambassador to NATO Julie Smith sent me a letter prior to her confirmation in which she agreed that our NATO allies should spend more, I emphasize more, than 2% of GDP on defense. The current Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Grady, did the same. He agreed, for the record, in response to my questions, that our NATO allies need to spend more than 2% on defense. When you and I spoke yesterday, we talked about this. I asked you this question. You said that, in your opinion, that our allies should be spending more than 2% on defense. I'd just like to get you on the record on that, if I could. In your view, can you confirm for us that you think, in your opinion, it's time for our NATO allies to move beyond the Wales Pledge and commit to increase defense spending above 2%?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Thank you for that. Let me ask you about the situation with burden sharing again back in Europe. As I mentioned just a second ago, I think one of the reasons our European allies, especially Germany, have been slow to increase their spending is that they think the United States will bail them out in difficult situations. Would you agree that our European allies are more likely to increase their spending if the United States reduces its overall force levels in the European theater?
Senator, I believe that our European allies do key their contributions to an assessment of American contributions. I think it is an interesting idea that a reduction in American contributions would lead to an increase in European contributions. I would want to ask the intelligence community for past sort of evidence about the rise and fall of contributions to give you a better answer. My instinct is that persuasion and high expectations and clear requirements are the motivator for European contributions to common defense in NATO.
Just as a thinking about it as a matter of incentives, Dr. Wallander, do you think that we should at least consider putting on the table reducing our overall force posture in Europe so that our allies feel incentivized to defend themselves? And you and I talked about this on the phone. I mean, where I'm coming from on this is that we can't, the United States of America simply can't do it all at the same time. We're facing a very acute challenge in the Indo-Pacific theater from China. We can't maintain, in my own view, we can't do what we need to do in that theater and maintain our current posture in Europe. We're going to have to make some hard choices somewhere, and they are hard choices, unless we're going to spend $2 trillion a year on defense, which we're not going to do, and we shouldn't do. So with that backdrop, I mean, what's your view on putting on the table with our European allies? And listen, we may need to consider an overall force posture reduction in Europe in order to meet our pressing security commitments elsewhere. I mean, what do you think about that?
Senator, I believe that as we face a heightened threat from Russia, this would not be the moment to put a reduction in American commitment to NATO on the table. But what I would favor, if confirmed, is looking at how the United States can provide some of its advantages in enablers, in weapons system, in security cooperation with allies to ensure that we are properly resourcing the requirements in the Indo-Pacific, as you rightly point to, and yet sustaining defense and deterrence against Russia.
Thank you very much. I'll have some questions for the record for the rest of you. Thanks again. Thank you, Dr. Wallander. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Let me now recognize via WebEx Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Wallander, you heard earlier in this hearing, Dr. Plumb testify that he thought that the adoption of a no first use policy in the current nuclear posture review would not be in the national security interests of the United States. Do you agree with that conclusion?
Yes, I do, Senator.
Second question, how would the allies react to the adoption of a no first use policy, particularly Japan and some of the Asia Pacific allies?
Senator, I thank you for that important question. That is a fundamental reason why I do not support a no first use declaratory policy, because I believe it would create concerns about the credibility of American defense commitments to our allies, in addition to possibly undermining the credibility in the eyes of our adversaries.
And it could provoke some of those countries to adopt their own nuclear weapons, which is going in exactly the opposite direction that we want in terms of nonproliferation. Isn't that correct?
Senator, yes, I agree. That is another reason.
Second question on Ukraine. It seems to me that everybody's trying to guess what's in Vladimir Putin's mind, but by making these very public, high-level demands about no membership in NATO and all the other things, he's setting up these negotiations to fail and leaving himself very little option other than either a humiliating retreat or invasion. What do you make of this unusual negotiating strategy where you make demands that you know aren't going to be met? And is this just a pretext for an invasion?
Senator, I share your analytical assessment of the possible courses of action and the reasons for the demands that Russia has made publicly, and it concerns me greatly for Ukraine's security and indeed for European and Euro-Atlantic security.
Let me turn to Ms. Dalton for a question. Ms. Dalton, this country's under attack, and 2 people a day in my home state of Maine are dying. The attack is transnational drug shipments coming into this country that are literally killing Americans at a record rate over the last couple of years. It's an absolute tragedy. Every year we have testimony. We know of shipments coming by sea to North America from Latin America, but because of limitations on our capacity to react, we can only interdict 25% of the shipments we know about. And it strikes me that this is one of these things where it's falling in the cracks between the Coast Guard and the Navy. Would you commit to me to really taking a serious look at the allocation of resources so that we can do something about this, what I consider an outrageous failure of the United States government to interdict shipments of drugs into this country that we know about?
Senator, thank you for highlighting this challenge, and it's why I think it was really important that President Biden's interim national security strategic guidance highlighted the threat of transnational criminal organizations, both to U.S. national security interests as well as to allies and partners in our greater hemispheric region. Which is why, if confirmed, I would look forward to working closely with the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and other interagency counterparts to address this challenge. I do believe that it is primarily a law enforcement function to address this challenge, but do believe there's an important role for the Department of Defense to play in
Well,
support.
if these were invaders headed for our borders to kill people, we wouldn't view it as a law enforcement function. We view it as an invasion, as an attack, and people are dying as a result of this. So I hope you rethink. You mentioned law enforcement. Somewhere we got to find the ships to stop these shipments, and to say it's law enforcement and the Coast Guard doesn't have enough ships, that's not a satisfactory answer. As long as I keep having this testimony that we're only able to interdict 25% of the shipments that we know about, I'm not going to be satisfied. And I hope you'll rethink your answer, and there'll be an interagency discussion about an adequate response to this. Dr. Plumb, just in a few seconds left, I'm very worried that we're behind the curve on hypersonics. We're way behind the curve on hypersonics. Do you agree and that this should be an urgent matter, both in terms of the development of an offensive deterrent capacity, but also defensive capacity? Because I don't think any of our missile defense systems can cope with a 7,000-mile-an-hour maneuverable missile.
Senator, thanks for that question. I agree we are challenged by hypersonics defensively, and from an offensive standpoint, at least from public reporting, it certainly appears that we are behind and need to focus on this challenge.
Well, I hope this is a hair-on-fire challenge,
National Guard space.
Dr. Plumb, and I really appreciate your answer. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Now let me recognize via WebEx Senator Manchin, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. Dr. Wallander, do you foresee any positive or negative impacts to our relations with the new German government in the event of sanctions imposed on companies involved with the planning or construction of Nord Stream 2 pipeline?
Senator, thank you for that question. My understanding of the composition of the new German government is that there is a renewed skepticism of Russia and its role in Europe, and in particular, Russia's use of energy as a coercive tool against Europe and Russia's other neighbors. And if confirmed, I intend to fully explore the possibility, opportunity for a closer alignment of U.S. assessment of Russia's use of energy in particular as a tool of coercion for our national security policy.
Do you believe or have any knowledge that the new German government would honor its pledge to halt to Nord Stream 2 certification in the event of a Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Senator, I think we should take the German government at its word and hold it to its commitments. And if confirmed, that would be, I believe, one of my supporting roles in a whole-of-government diplomatic approach to our allies in coping with this crisis that Russia has created.
Thank you. Dr. Plumb, since the institution of the Space Force, I've been concerned that we're going to leave our Space National Guard forces behind as we're standing up this new force. And West Virginia has a very active National Guard we're very proud of. Are you supportive of a Space National Guard?
Senator, thanks for that question. I've myself been in the reserves for 20 years, and I'm both proud of and fully aware of the capabilities that reserve and guard functions can bring. I know that the guard issue is before the the Congress. My own personal view is there is value in Guard and Reserve support for the Space Force.
How do you believe, sir, that we could keep that, continue to expand capabilities in space and also keep equity between the active and the reserve component resources? And we're not seeing much movement on that, and that's what we're concerned about.
Senator, I need to, if confirmed, I would like to look into this issue. I do have friends that are in the Air National Guard that do Space Force missions, so I do know that those units exist. As far as a resource imbalance, I'd be happy to work with the committee and you to look into that.
Dr. Wallander, back to you again. I've long had concerns. I opposed the JCPOA, known as the Iran deal, and I opposed that because I thought that any country that we're submitting back in should earn the rewards, other than basically and making them demonstrate their goodwill before we give it to them on the front end. So my question would be, do you believe that generally that we should relax sanctions on Iran in future before they demonstrate if we're back in negotiations again?
Senator, I am not fully briefed on the details of the negotiations, but to answer your question, I believe that the importance of those kinds of negotiations and agreements are if the parties meet the letter, strictly speaking, of the agreement. So I would not be in favor of relief on sanctions without full compliance with the terms of the agreement.
Okay, and Dr. Plumb, I think you might have talked about this earlier, but the Russia and China have an interest in demonstrating their capability of their anti-satellite weapons. Given our military reliance upon satellites for navigation and communication, this capability can severely weaken, I believe, very, very much so, our military's ability to respond effectively in the opening hours of a conflict. So how prepared do you assess that we are to protect against these threats so that we won't be immobile?
Thanks, Senator. The anti-satellite kinetic debris cloud causing tests, both of China and Russia, are deeply disturbing and a concern to me. I don't have the advantage of the classified briefings on our ability to fight through a threat today. What I will commit to you is that if confirmed, I will work to make sure that our architecture is more resilient so that this type of attack is less attractive to an adversary.
Do you have any opinions on basically what the Department of Defense could do to defend against China's, that they've demonstrated their anti-satellite capabilities?
Senator, there's a number of possibilities. Obviously, one possibility that I fully agree with, Deputy Secretary of Defense Hicks said at the first National Space Council meeting for the Biden administration that the Department of Defense is in favor of banning kinetic anti-satellite tests by all nations. So I think that would help. I also think making sure that we have constellations that are resilient so we're not entirely dependent on one particular asset would also be helpful. And I imagine there are any number of other operations at classified levels that I'd be happy to discuss with you if confirmed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. And thank all of you. Appreciate your service to our country.
Thank you very much, Senator Manchin. Now let me recognize via WebEx Senator Peters.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's good to be here at the committee, and congratulations to each of the folks here testifying. Dr. Wallander, you are assuming this position in the midst of an incredibly tense situation in Eastern Europe, and I'd kind of like to get your sense on how you believe our European allies will respond to any kinetic actions by Russia. You know, certainly Europe is in the midst of a cold winter, and reliance on Russian energy resources makes some European nations vulnerable to Putin's aggression. So my question for you is, what role will access to Russian energy play in determinations by key European allies, such as Germany, France, and Italy, and others, on whether or not to directly or to vigorously defend Ukrainian sovereignty?
Senator, thank you for that question. I think it is a very important one, and it points to the vulnerability created by depending on Russian energy supplies, because Russia has proven itself to be very willing to use cutoffs of supplies or cutbacks in supplies, which it is currently doing in order to send coercive messages. That said, I have great confidence that our European allies are confronting the scope and seriousness of Russian aspirations, aggressive aspirations against Ukraine and European and therefore global security. And if confirmed, I will press hard with them to face the reality that dependence on Russian energy is a vulnerability that needs to be mitigated so that all NATO members are able to stand up effectively for our common defense and deterrence.
Very good. Ms. Dalton, over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to learn more about how the Department of Defense plans to performing counter unmanned aircraft system operations, including a visit that I had to the proving ground in Yuma, Arizona, to witness some demonstrations of new technology that's coming on board. This is an area of great concern to me as chairman of Homeland Security Committee and working with the Department of Homeland Security and other assets such as Border Patrol, the Coast Guard, and other parts of Homeland Security that is facing this threat and would need to work, in my mind, in a cooperative way with the Department of Defense to fully utilize technologies and protect us here at home. My question to you is, how can the Department of Defense best position itself to assist federal partners such as the Department of Homeland Security to combat this very real UAS threat?
Senator, thank you for your leadership on this important issue. I do believe that it is a growing challenge here in the homeland. And if confirmed, I do believe there's an opportunity for some best practices and information sharing because the department is frankly facing some of these similar challenges abroad from counter UAS threats from both state and non-state actors. So I think an important opportunity to share lessons and best practices and tool sets. Obviously a different context here at home, but I would look forward to working on that together.
Thank you. Dr. Plumb, last year, a study commissioned by the U.S. Space Force, the Defense Innovation Unit, and the Air Force Research Laboratory found that the U.S. is, and I'm going to quote them, is, quote, woefully inadequate to compete for global market share because China has cornered and dominated the global space market, end of quote. That report goes on to say, and quote again, the United States must develop new market-enhancing tools to increase U.S. commercial space activities, grow viable U.S. space companies, and finance their growth, end of quote. The Department of Defense would obviously play a vital role in developing these tools. And my question for you is, if confirmed, what tools would you advise the Secretary of Defense to create to promote a much more dynamic domestic space marketplace?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I think that the growth of the commercial sector for space in the United States is actually a driving economic engine for the U.S., and the Department of Defense should be part of ensuring that that continues. I do think the department has a problem where it comes to recognizing and then adopting into their programs innovative new technology from small businesses in particular. I'm aware of a few efforts underway inside the Space Force to fix that, and I look forward to the opportunity to try to enhance that and bring that along if confirmed.
Well, we would hope, we'd look forward to working with you on that very important mission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Tillis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all of you on your nominations. And I hope time provided I get to ask you all questions, but I have to start where we left off yesterday. Dr. Wallander, thank you so much for your time. I thought it was a very productive discussion. I intend to support all of your nominations, unless you mess up here, but I don't think that's going to happen. Dr. Wallander, I want to go back to Russia and the discussion that we had yesterday with their current posture and their focus on the Ukraine. I'm particularly interested with the negotiations, which to me seem that they've drawn an untenable position for us to move towards. But there's some discussion right now that maybe we should think about our activities, maybe our operations tempo in terms of work that we're doing with some of our NATO partners and allies in that area. Do you think that that's productive to say that we would actually potentially reduce the current levels of activity, or why should that be on the table as a discussion for negotiation?
Senator, I share your concern about the messaging surrounding that reporting. I would highlight that were Russia to cease its dangerous, destabilizing, and problematic activities and exercises that, right now we're looking at the headlines, but this is a constant problem of Russian activities in the Black Sea, the Baltic region, and now the focus on Ukraine's borders. That would be a desirable end state. If a negotiation were focused on Russia coming back into compliance with its already existing commitments under the Conventional Forces in Europe agreement, that could be a positive for European security and Ukraine. But I share your concern that starting from now kind of seeds what Russia, the dangerous activities that Russia has already been engaged with, and I wouldn't support starting from that base.
We also talked a little bit about Nord Stream. We're going to have a vote later today on sanctions. We have a couple of proposals here. One is sanctions would be imposed if Russia invades Ukraine. The other one is to go ahead and put them in place now. What are the merits of either of those two proposals or concerns that you would have with them?
Senator, I first want to make clear that I fully support the availability of really serious sanctions in a toolkit for dealing with Russian coercive abilities.
There are some people here that think they don't work. So, go ahead and continue with your answer with that.
It's a complicated question. What do they work to achieve? And they don't always. I think skepticism is well merited, and we have to be modest in our understanding. And that's why I would emphasize sanctions as part of a toolkit. Sanctions also can be used to reduce Russian capabilities to be able to coerce and deploy coercive and aggressive threats against neighbors and allies. So I am not fully read into the various proposals and the sequencing of them, but as a matter of policy, I support the judicious use of sanctions both for ongoing erosion of Russian capabilities and leverage and as a deterrent, element of an effective deterrent.
And I'm not sure if you can answer this, but just based on public reports from experts, do you believe if Ukraine decided or if Russia decided to invade Ukraine, that their objectives would be swift and decisive?
Senator, I have a long career of studying the Soviet and then the Russian military, and it is my assessment that the Ukrainians would fight admirably and well and be quite effective in imposing enormous costs on Russian military forces. But the signals we're hearing from the Kremlin suggest exactly what you point to, which is a potential for a decisive and swift military strike, and it's very concerning.
Thank you. Dr. Plumb, I'm going to submit some questions for the record, but in my capacity as ranking member on Personnel Subcommittee, I look forward to working on things that we can do to fill the gap. You're going to have, we have a resource problem in terms of being able to compete with the private sector on the best and brightest for cyber threats. So I look forward to working with everyone in DOD that's focused on the issue. And Ms. Dalton, I'm going to just submit a couple of questions for the record on particularly China and Latin America. I just got off of a conference call with business here that's trying to focus on rare earth mineral extraction and a number of other things. There's a disturbing trend in South America and Latin America with Chinese investment threatening, actually even making what are already fragile supply chains more fragile. But I'll submit those for the record. I look forward to supporting all of your nominations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Let me recognize Senator Rosen, please.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Reed. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and I want to thank the nominees for being here today, your willingness to serve. So we'll just get right into it about cybersecurity, of course, utmost top of everybody's mind. And I'd like to focus particularly on NATO and cybersecurity, an issue I raised with Admiral Grady during his confirmation hearing, and one that came up consistently when I had the chance to visit NATO headquarters on a congressional delegation in November. So, Dr. Wallander, as you know, cybersecurity is part of NATO's core task of collective defense. Given rising threats of cyber attacks, of course we know from Russia and China, NATO's efforts to protect allied networks and enhance resilience across the alliance through information sharing and joint exercises, of course, has become more critical than ever. So again, Dr. Wallander confirmed, how would the Department of Defense collaborate with our NATO allies to prevent, mitigate, and recover from cyber attacks targeting our critical infrastructure, our energy grids, our water grids, our pipelines? We know that we've seen cyber attacks in the past. What would you be doing to collaborate with NATO, please?
Senator, thank you for your question highlighting this important aspect of NATO common defense and the challenge to NATO security. Many of our NATO allies were in the forefront in recognizing Russia's use of the cyber domain for assault. And so the partnership with those allies has proven very helpful in the last couple of years as Russia has upped its activities in this domain. If confirmed, I would work with Dr. Plumb's office, if confirmed, to make sure that we have both the functional and regional expertise to effectively engage with NATO allies in order to make sure that we coordinate not just government resources, but one of the challenges that you know is that much of the cyber infrastructure is private, is commercial. And Europe faces that challenge just as the United States does. So I think our best common practices are not just from the Defense Department, but also would require a whole of government approach and coordination with the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I sit on the Homeland Security Committee. We just had a hearing on this recently with CISA talking about how they are planning to try to take care of some of these issues. So I hope you continue to work with them. But I'd like to move on, Dr. Wallander, to issues about Iranian aggression, because they're still out there. And I've noted in previous hearings, Iranian-backed militias, well, they're increasingly targeting U.S. installations and service members in both Iraq and Syria via rocket and drone attacks. Iran, we don't have to, can't say this enough, it's the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, continues to be a threat to the United States and allied interests via its ballistic missile program and support for Hezbollah and other terrorist proxies. So can you discuss the threat of Iranian-backed militias in the Middle East, the threat they pose to our U.S. troops and allies, and if confirmed, how would you use your existing DoD authorities to target these malign groups and proactively protect our personnel?
Senator, I very much share your concern. A lot of our focus in public tends to be on Iran's nuclear weapons program, and that is, concerning. But we can't lose sight of the fact that Iran is actively supporting groups that strike at American personnel installations and capabilities in the region and undermine our ability to responsibly implement counterterrorism missions in the region. If confirmed, I will focus on the partner relations in the region to work with them to make sure that we are doing everything necessary to counter Iran's activities and to undermine them, but also to do an evaluation within DoD to make sure we are properly resourced and postured. And I would cooperate with some of the other offices, in particular those involved in special operations, the functional offices in the Department of Defense.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to you, Ms. Dalton, about the DoD cyber strategy. I understand, if confirmed, you'll serve as the chief civilian advisor to the Secretary of Defense on cybersecurity. And so given the large number of federal agencies responsible for protecting the homeland from cyber threats, What would you define as the Department of Defense appropriate role in addressing our nation's cybersecurity? And separately, if confirmed, how would you strengthen that interagency collaboration to ensure coordinated approaches going forward?
Senator, thank you for highlighting the critical challenge of cybersecurity and the department's role. The department is the sector risk management agency for the Defense Industrial Base. And so if confirmed, I would look forward to stewarding those authorities, those responsibilities in close coordination with the Department of Homeland Security, the intelligence community, U.S. Cyber Command, and other components to protect our critical infrastructure, our relationships with the private sector, critical supply chains. All of these are unfortunately experiencing threats. And so ensuring we have the requisite protections and resilience going forward will be a priority of mine.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, everybody, for participating here today. Dr. Plumb, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the anti-satellite missile tests that have been conducted by the Chinese and the Russians. The test in 2007, you were asked about it earlier. That kinetic kill vehicle put a debris field from about 100 miles, probably all the way up to a couple thousand miles. On one of my space shuttle flights, I had to maneuver out of the way of some of that debris, and that was well over a decade ago. And just this past November, the space station had to move out of the way of that debris field, and this is going to become a continuing, problem. Thousands, I think 2,000 pieces of debris. The Russians launched a test themselves, but I want to focus a little bit on the Chinese capability. So, DoD had a report that detailed China's emerging counter space capabilities, including satellite jammers, directed energy weapons, and these ground-based anti-satellite missiles like we saw in 2007 with the test. So what is your current assessment of China's emerging counter space capabilities? And if confirmed, how is your office going to address this emerging threat?
Thank you for that question, Senator. And I will just say, I think you're spot on. The Chinese threat to our space assets is growing, and it's troubling, and it's in many different vectors. And I think being able to counter that, there's no one solution. I think one of the advantages of integrating the different policy offices that are functional under this ASD ship, if confirmed, would be the ability to more tightly interweave cyber operations and counter space operations, for example. I would say the Chinese threat is possibly, in order to successfully prevail in a campaign or a warfare campaign, we need to have a resilient architecture that can handle some of those attacks, because some of those attacks are sure to come. I think calling out kinetic destructive tests in particular, because those pose a long-term enduring problem to all spacefaring nations, including astronauts, would be helpful as well. And I think that there are, in the spectrum of warfare, we need to be ready for kinetic attacks against these assets as well. It's a cross-domain problem, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If we just think about space versus space, it doesn't deal with the ground problem in a way that is sufficient, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is in any conflict with a near-peer adversary, it is clearly the high ground. And we know the importance of being able to maintain the high ground, and this is a place that we need to be present and capable and continue to innovate. So thank you. I look forward to working with you after your confirmation. I want to just transition on a totally different subject to Ms. Dalton for a second. As you may know, being from Arizona, I represent over 370 miles of U.S.-Mexico border. And in fact, I think I'm the only member of this committee that is in a southwest border state. I've repeatedly called on the administration to better resource DHS and the National Guard's border mission to address the crisis at the border, and it is a crisis. We currently have over 2,400 National Guard troops deployed to the U.S.-Mexico border by the Department of Defense, and another 1,300 by governors, including the Arizona governor. But this isn't enough, clearly is not. I mean, I've spent time at the border. I continue to hear from law enforcement, especially sheriffs, but also mayors in border communities and my constituents on this issue. And the challenges should not fall on local communities. It's a crisis, and it's hard for them to manage. The National Guard play a critical security role here, well, in a lot of ways, right? Responding to national disasters, helping communities tackle COVID, supporting security at our border. It's imperative that we give them the tools that they need to do this work. The National Guard needs to have those tools. So, Ms. Dalton, do I have your commitment to, and this is, I think, an easy question, do I have your commitment to work with us to ensure that those troops are well-resourced as they conduct these missions at the U.S.-Mexico border?
Yes, Senator, you do. And if confirmed, I would look forward to visiting Arizona and the southwest border to better understand the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. And for Ms. Wallander, I'm going to submit the question for the record. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kelly, and I want to thank the witnesses for their very thoughtful testimony today, and also for the willingness to serve as they've served before. With that, let me adjourn this hearing. Thank you.